Welcome to Women Behind the Journals. My name's Robin, and I've got my co-host here, Kelly.
Hello.
And today we're joined by one of the founders of Scientify Research, a company dedicated to helping researchers find funding. So welcome, Kate Gardner.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin and Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Wow, it's very nice to have you here. And we actually go back a little way in that Kate is, although now an entrepreneur, previously worked at Frontiers with myself and Kelly. So that's kind of where our connection goes back to. So it's really nice to actually kind of come full circle and find out a little bit more about what you're doing and what you're up to with Scientify Research. I mean, I don't want to take all the spotlight here. Kelly, do you want to maybe dive in and we can ask some questions?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, obviously having known you and worked with you somewhat closely at Frontiers, I've kept an eye on what you've been doing with Scientify. But I guess you want to give us an introduction about what it is and why you set it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So Scientify Research is a startup that's based in Stockholm, Sweden. The company was actually founded by Judy Mielke, who's the original founder, the founder of Scientify Research. And Judy and I also worked together in academic publishing in the past. And Judy's idea with Scientify Research was really to start a company that would help solve some of the problems that researchers are faced with, and primarily when it comes to saving time and making their workflows easier. So her idea with Scientify Research was to develop an open research funding database as a first step, and really helping researchers solve the first problem, which is finding funding. So that's the first problem they're faced with at the beginning of the research cycle is finding funding. That can be a real challenge, and the idea was to start with an open database that's easy for people to go to Google and look for funding and see all of the funders and the open funding calls aggregated in one place.
Yeah, I think that's a super cool idea. Like, that's what we all want, right? One place that we can go to and find all the information that I'm looking for, instead of having to go to 400 different places and have logins or have stuff behind paywalls, I guess.
Yeah. Exactly.
I have a quick question, and maybe a silly question. So is it just open access funding calls, or is it sort of more broader for other calls, or is it just open access?
It's all research funding calls. So the idea is we would ultimately like to see all of the research funding coming from governments or innovation funding or foundation funding. All of the research funding that's out there globally, we would like to see in our funding database. That's the goal. And
do you find that do you have to sign funders up? How does that kind of connection with the funders work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So we in the beginning, what we've done is we really focused on building a database that has a nice taxonomy structure that makes it easy for researchers to use filters and find the information that they're looking for. So we did some, we do some amount of manual curation to bring in the funding information. Ultimately, we would like to see funders coming to use our database and put in their open calls immediately. So we have this option available already, and many funders are taking the initiative to come and put in their funding information like the day the call is open. Of course, we would get the funding calls into our database as soon as possible. But this helps if funders come and put the information in quickly. Now, we also are working with, right now we have a data scientist working with us who's helping us use machine learning and natural language processing to bring in all of the open funding calls from large open, government funding databases, for example. So that it's a combination of these three things really, is, using tools and smart ways to bring in the funding information, also having, the user-generated content from the funders, and then the manual curation that we do, which is really what makes the database so useful for researchers, because the data is not just scraped. It's giving them the information that they need about, like, when is the letter of intent due? When is the application deadline? Are there direct or indirect costs? What are the benefits that come with this funding package? How much is it for how many years? So these are the things we really decided to tailor the filters and the information that people can filter through based on what they're looking for. And I think that's what sets us apart really from other funding databases, besides the fact that we have an open access version.
And what's the difference between the open access version and the paid for version? Or versions?
That's a good question. Right now we're actually in the midst of launching our premium version of our database. So we already have some commercial and university subscribers for the premium version. And I guess the simple way to describe the difference is we have advanced filtering options. So, it's if an individual pays for an individual premium subscription, or a university or a commercial company pays for a subscription, they'll all have access to these advanced filtering options, which just makes it that much easier and faster to find funding.
And you mentioned these kind of, sorry, Robin, I'm talking too much.
No. See, this is where you know that we're not professionals at this. I was just going to say, I think that is just going to be such an amazing service to those who are looking to try and navigate the waters, which can be a bit confusing at some points. And yeah, I just think it's a brilliant idea, and we need this for different areas in publishing as well, not just the funding, but kind of throughout this life cycle of the researcher. I think there is, if you ever have plans to expand, I think there's lots more that could be done. Sorry, Kelly, what was your question? Mine was just more of a comment than anything.
No, I think it's a good comment though. Like, there's ever increasing demands on researchers' time. And I can imagine, searching for grant funding has got to be one of the most important activities that they have to do. So ensuring that they can do that as efficiently as possible is a really cool project. And I can't wait to see it keep growing as it has done over the last, year or couple of years now?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, we launched in 2021.
Yeah.
And I started working with Judy a year ago. So it's been a year that I've been working on this.
And what kind of have been the real hurdles? Because, a startup, I don't have any experience of a startup, but I can imagine that it is challenging to kind of get things really, really going. And especially when you have a great idea and you're passionate about it and you want to get it out, what have been some of the challenges that you've faced?
That's a good question. I think what immediately comes to mind, and it's so obvious really, is the challenge of not having enough people and time to do everything that we need to do. We're obviously right now we're just starting to monetize. So being a pre-revenue startup, and knowing all of the things that we need to do to make our roadmap happen, and to not have the financial resources in the beginning to hire the people with the expertise we need right away. So Judy and I have been creative, I guess, in the beginning with how we can find people with expertise to work with us. So we've been really fortunate to work with some programs in Sweden where we can have people working through these programs. For example, Jobbsprånget, or through the Karolinska Institute, they have programs for internships where people can have a salary, and it's not paid for by us, but of course we don't have to feel guilty for having
Yeah.
unpaid interns. So everyone who's working with us is paid. And we've also been able to, we were really fortunate this year, at the end of last year to get a grant from Vinova. So that's how our data scientist, for example, is paid. She has a 6-month contract that's paid with this great funding program from Vinova that keeps Marie Curie PhD scholars in Sweden. So this is what we've done to bring in experts to help us with of course the skills and that we don't have, and we've been really grateful for these programs. But of course this is not scalable, and so that's why we're of course working on our monetization plan now. I guess the other challenge that maybe isn't so obvious is the fact that I think not all researchers, so the people that would be using our database regularly, I think that they don't always think about how problematic this is until it's too late, the search for funding. So I think, in my experience, last year I spent a lot of time just interviewing researchers, asking them about their experience with funding, finding funding, rejections with funding applications. And it seems to me that it's a problem because they don't, what's happening is researchers are really just looking for or applying for the funding that they're told within their circles to apply for. And I think that there are a lot of researchers out there who are not casting a wide enough net to find funding from, maybe funders that they haven't considered. And I think this is a big problem. I hope that we can be part of this solution to really help researchers see there are many other funding options that are out there. You don't have to apply for just apply for that one grant that has like a 3% success rate just because someone told you that's what you should do. Maybe there are other funders and other funding mechanisms out there that would be a better fit and would have a higher likelihood of success. And I think researchers do waste a lot of time, and it's so frustrating for them to apply for grants knowing that the success rate is 3%, and they could have a beautiful application and still not get funded because there's this imbalance between funders and where people are applying. So there are very well-known funders, everyone applies, the success rate is very low. It's like a lottery, really. And then there are other funders that are extending their deadlines because they don't have enough qualified applicants.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a problem of you don't know what you don't know. So there hasn't previously been one place to find all of these funders and these funding opportunities. So you only search where you know to search or where you're told to search. So yeah, hopefully this will enlighten a lot of researchers to alternative funding options and possibilities for them, and maybe flood some of those funders that have been struggling to give money away with applications.
It does sound very siloed, the process of kind of there's a funder here and there's a funder here, and I don't know about the funders over the hill. It seems like it's quite, I guess it's quite a niche area, really, actually connecting those dots together, but it's a niche that is clearly very much needed. I did want to ask you a question about, you said that there's a low percentage chance for certain saying publishers, it's because I've got my publishing hat, for certain funders to actually grant the money that they need. Is there a way that Scientify Research is able to give recommendations or suggestions where they might be more successful based on their needs and how well it sort of matches up?
That's a good question, and that's something that we're thinking about a lot right now. So we, at the moment, beyond, of course, the filters and the search tool that we have built into our database, we don't have those tools developed yet, but we We would like to, this is what we're thinking of right now. How can the information that we have about grants be more useful for people? Are there smarter ways for us to present this information to people, and even find ways to show them more immediately, even without them searching? So this is all being discussed right now when we're thinking about how to evolve our database and make it more useful, definitely. And also thinking about information that could be useful for funders as well, because funders are looking to have more applicants and looking to find the best suited applicants globally. And there are so many funders that have, you know, global funding options, and they may only be getting, you know, the majority of their applicants from the country where they're based.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, the platform I work on collaborate quite closely with the European Commission, and I've had to dig into a lot of their grant agreements and their proposals and the calls, and a lot of it is written in such legalese that even for me, who spends a lot of time in there trying to figure out if someone from a particular country is eligible to submit an application on their own, or they have to be partnered up with a member state or whatever. So it's not easy to identify these, even when you're looking at arguably one of the biggest funders in the world.
Yes.
I was gonna suggest maybe something that it's probably already part of your evolution plans, but I guess the next stage would be to, once you've helped researchers to find their funding, to help them write their proposals for those funding grants, you know, to write their applications. And I think that there's some really nice tools out there at the moment, you know, helping
Chat GPT, is that where you're going with this?
Chat GPT, my new best friend, Chat GPT. You know, there's so many different things out there. I mean, what do you think about the field at the moment in terms of technology that helps researchers and tools, you know, to help researchers acquire funding or to write certain grant proposals? You know, do you think that we've reached a point where it's a lot easier for researchers at the moment, or do we still have quite a way to go?
I think we have quite a ways to go. I mean, I think the technology is there. I think how we use it, how researchers use it to save time is still, you know, I think there are a lot of questions there. I think, yeah, obviously our plan beyond the database is to think of and build other tools and resources to help researchers with anywhere where there's a time suck, right? And I think even the technology that exists right now for the grant application process, for example, it's often it's it's very bureaucratic. It's a lot of time. Like, could there be smarter ways to get all of the information that goes into a standard grant application, you know, in a
like apply through LinkedIn or something?
Well, that might be too easy. Yeah.
I guess I did have a question about that actually. Like, are you collecting information on the kind of logistics of how you can apply for these things, and how much variability there is between the different funding calls, to help researchers kind of group these, like, oh, maybe I can submit a simultaneous application to these three using the same materials without having to kind of rewrite a whole new proposal, or like reformat your CV before you apply for every single job, essentially.
Oh, that's a good idea. We haven't worked on that, but yeah, that would be, yeah, add it to the list of things that we should be doing, right?
Ellie, you shouldn't give away a good idea for free.
Yeah, this is charging for this consultancy service now.
I mean, I think even like when it comes to grant writing, so one thing that we are doing, for example, next month is we're hosting a workshop, a 2-hour workshop with someone who is an expert at grant writing. So Professor Daniel Mertens, he's joining us for this webinar, and obviously there's a need for this because we promoted this once on social media, and we have our Zoom account right now has 100 spots, and they filled up in a day, right? So and now we have this growing waiting list, and obviously we need to open this webinar up to more attendees, but there's a need for this. I know that there are many universities and research offices that do an excellent job of providing these types of support, grant writing workshops, even courses. But there are a lot of researchers who don't have access to these offerings. So this is something that we're really pleased about doing, just having this webinar. Maybe we'll continue to host webinars like this in the future. And maybe there's another way that we could bring this information to more researchers globally.
I wanted to ask you a question, Kate, around how, and this is kind of taking it to the other end of the researcher to publishing kind of cycle. What can be done in terms of helping? Sorry, I'm trying to formulate this question in the worst possible way. What can be to sort of help researchers align their eventual publishing goals and their funding goals? Because I think those two are quite separate in a lot of ways, and yet a lot of funders are now requiring kind of open access publication, and then the authors have their own kind of goals for publication and where they want to get published. Is there a way to align these two things? I'm sorry.
Trying to are on the spot now.
Yeah, give the right answer. Yeah, I mean, to align publishing goals with funding goals. I mean, I guess is the question in terms of, obviously there are funders that have expectations with publication, right? I
mean, maybe there is no way. Maybe I've just connected two things. I'm just thinking from a kind of publisher perspective.
Maybe it would be interesting to include information on like what kind of mandates the publishers have. So like researchers are aware at the beginning of the process, like if I receive funding from this funder, I'm going to have to make my data open.
Mm-hmm.
What do I think about that? Do I actually agree with that as a policy? Does it matter? Because I just need the funding, and ultimately I'm going to have to do what they want. Like with funders making these mandates, is there still space for researchers to object?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what this says to me is, I was just going to say, what this says to me is that maybe researchers aren't thinking about publishing this early on. Maybe they should be, but they're not. They're so focused on just securing funding at this stage. It's too far down the line to think about publishing work where they're just trying to get the funding for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, they must be thinking about, I mean, this is obviously a question for researchers, but I would assume they're thinking about their publications when they're writing their applications for funding, because they have to write it in, the costs.
They have a lot of them include like a question about dissemination, and moreover now a lot of them are asking about commitments to open science, open research. So I think they do have to be thinking about it. Sorry, Kate.
They may not be thinking about which publisher or if what the mandates are from the from either the funder or the publisher, but I think they're definitely thinking, okay, at some point we're obviously going to have to publish this. It's a question that's been asked, actually. I've had more than one person ask me if our database could provide information about the funders' requirements and mandates for publication. And right now we don't provide that data. It's I think in part because it's complicated. We don't want to get it wrong because it changes constantly. So we have to think about one of the other problems is, I think that because this is evolving so quickly right now, the information that sits on the internet from some funders about their requirements might not be up to date. And that's that's something we've been thinking about, is could we provide this information? And then also thinking, would it be useful to researchers? Is that something that they would filter for? I don't know. It would probably be more useful, maybe more useful for publishers, I guess, to see what the funders are mandating. Yeah.
How did you come up with the filters that you already have in the platform? Because you could already filter in some super cool ways, especially for researchers looking for funding. So how did you devise those filters already? And do you want to give us a sneak preview of any that are like coming up? Any additional filters you're thinking about?
I could share my screen and show you the filters that we have in our premium database. The filters really were designed. I mean, we came into this knowing to some extent what we thought would be the most reasonable ways that researchers would search for funding, just based on what we know in our experience and working with researchers. Judy was a researcher herself and looking for funding at one point in her career, and thinking about what people, what researchers complain about when when we were working in academic publishing with them. But we also approached this with interviews last year. So this is something we did just to confirm what we thought were the most useful filters, and obviously we made a lot of changes along the way. So I interviewed researchers throughout the course of last year and spoke with them about this and asked them what they would be interested in, and we used their feedback to help us really expand the filters that we have. A lot of it, I think that the filters that are most interesting for people, and that people in working in research really wanted to see, was we have this option for people to search for funding based on global mobility, inbound or outbound. And I think that's really important, because you might be looking for funding, do a Google search, look at the funder's information, and it might have some citizenship requirement, but it's really not clear. You have to dig down further and look at the call and see, like, okay, is there support for people to move? Let's say I'm a researcher working in the US and I want to come to Germany. Would this allow me to have that global mobility or not? What type of visa support is there? So we have these filters, and we're pulling that information out on what type of mobility options there are, and what type of visa support and other types of support researchers would have. So I think, I don't know. I mean, this is a podcast. Can I, do you want to see? Do you want to see?
It's a podcast / blog. I tell you what, there we go. You should be able to share now.
Let me. I should have had this pulled up before.
That's right. We gave you no warning about what we were going to ask you. So.
I love the fact that you're providing some support for the wider life of the researcher as well, though, because it's not just all about funding, but the fact that you might need to consider visa support for this piece of work. I think that researchers have so much going on, and I just recently attended the Researcher to Reader conference, and it was really interesting for me to learn a bit more about the kind of life cycle of research. Oh, Kelly.
Sorry, he wants to cut off.
It's too distracting because he's so beautiful.
He'll lie down in a minute.
I need to go get my coffee now. It's not fair.
I miss seeing your dog in meetings.
He misses you too.
I've totally lost my train of thought because of Dougie. Oh, so
sorry. Researcher to reader, reader to researcher.
I think it was just really interesting for me to learn a little bit more about the life cycle of research. And one of the things that we were discussing was about data availability statements, and a lot of the issues around why they're not there, or if they're there, then if they're inaccurate or the data isn't fair. And for those listening in who don't know SAIR, perhaps we could go into that into another lesson. You know, if it's not actually fair, then it's not really very usable. And a lot of the reasons why researchers aren't doing that is just because they haven't got any guidance, or they just don't have enough time, and there's a lot going on. So yeah, I think having additional support in terms of citizenship, amazing, you know, international mobility, it's just really, really helpful for the researcher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I can.
Okay. So I guess this is the easiest way for you to see, I guess, the difference between our freemium version and our premium filters. So any researcher can come to our database now and look for the funding, even without creating an account at all. So there's the basic grant information is there. They can search with keywords, they can find funding. It's just not as easy to really get the refined search. But there's every grant in our database is available. It's just not all of the information is available in the initial version. Now people can create an account and have a logged in version where they see more filters. So that would be what they see here. They'd be able to search by career stage. So we categorize the funding based on career stage, where they're currently working, so their current location. We also have this filter that's available with a freemium version where people can look for funding that's specifically dedicated to, for example, researchers at risk, minority researchers, women in research. There's a lot of funding out there that's dedicated just to women in research. So we've pulled these out and organized them so that people can easily find this type of funding, and people can also search by subject. So we have these subject areas. Now with the premium filters, it's possible to search by the grant type. And this is interesting because you might think, oh, well, I'm just looking for, you know, a research grant, but there are so many other types of funding out there. So we've categorized them by, you know, people who are organizing a conference. Maybe they're looking for dedicated funding just for conference organization, or a fellowship, or an equipment grant. We have all of these you can see in the drop-down menu. Scholarships, startup grants, science communication funding. This is there seems to be more and more of this type of funding. So people I hope that when people see these filters, actually, that they might think about ways to get funding that they didn't think about before.
Yeah.
We also have the option to filter in the premium version by the funding source. So many researchers have told us, oh, I know about the government funding that's out there. That's known to me, but I don't know what types of foundation or society or academy funding could be available. So people can filter, they can come in and they can filter by foundation or society funding, corporate funding, government funding, or intergovernmental funding. This goes back to what you were speaking to, Kelly, is, you know, do we need to look at, you know, bringing in researchers on this grant application from multi countries,
Yeah.
and venture capital. We also have the option for people here to filter by direct costs or indirect costs. Sometimes this is not specified, so we have that there as well. But if this is important, people can use these filters. We also have the additional benefits filter. So if someone is looking, for example, for retirement contributions or parental leave, if these health insurance, if these benefits are included in the call, we will organize it that way. So that is another way people could filter. And I guess we spoke about this already, but looking at the activity location where someone wants to work, what their citizenship is, what visa requirements would be what the visa requirements, and then also the global mobility, inbound or outbound, for the international mobility.
Mm.
So we have some other information. I probably shouldn't share all our secrets, but we have we are
friends.
It's all right. It's just us. No one else will.
It's you and everybody listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
So we are curating other information as well. But before we, add more filters, we want to make sure that we have a decent amount of information, because some funders don't list all of this information, and we don't want to have too many, empty spaces. But yeah, we are looking into, anytime someone tells us, oh, I wish I could search for funding in some other way, we do that. So we've also curated lists to help people find funding where we've already applied some of the filters, just to make it easier. So if someone wants to come in and look for funding, like special research funding, if they're looking for mobility, or they're working in a developing country, if they're looking specifically for awards, we've already pulled these out and created lists, and then they could filter down from there. And these are all open. So there is this possibility to see these funding lists based on special types of funding, based on career stage, subject, or even the location. So we have all this data on the funding and the open calls, and we're trying to find the best way possible for people to visualize this and to really see based on what type of search they're looking for. But here I can click here into our funding database. You can see this is how it appears today.
Yeah, there's already so much that you can do with those filters that exist even in the freemium version. But I can see how there's lots of potential and scope here to add an infinite number of filters here, really. But I like what you said about like making sure that the funders are actually providing this information, so you don't just have lots of blank spaces in the data. And maybe something like this could even encourage the funders themselves to start including more of this information, and have these funding calls become a little bit more standardized to make it easier for researchers as well. In particular, the additional benefits, I would like to see more of that. I can't imagine there's that much information about that in the funding calls.
Yeah, that was suggested to us by someone who was doing a fellowship in the US, and the funding came, it was government funding, not through the university, and because of that she didn't have any of the benefits through the university system. And this is definitely a problem that people have mentioned to us, particularly in the US, is that there's this, you're working at a university, but you're not entitled to any of their benefits that they would have for their employees, because they have outside funding. And I do hope that, I mean, that would be the dream, right? If funders could look at that and see, oh, right, we don't provide any health benefits for our fellows. This is problematic. I mean, just, if they were to see an empty space, would that make a difference? I would like to think so. But yeah, I who knows?
Remains to be seen, I guess. We'll have to wait and see.
I think it's going to have a huge impact anyway in supporting researchers, and the longer term impacts is, as the tool becomes more and more popular, funders are keen to make sure that they are fulfilling certain information requirements, and seeing that their applications actually increase as a result of this.
Mm-hmm.
It has that impact. It's an amazing toolkit.
Thank you. I was saying we should really be thanking Judy, because she works so much more on the product side and the development of this database. I was really just gathering the insights last year and the information from the researchers and feeding it to her. And then, with the developers that we've worked with, and with Smita, who's working as a data scientist, we've been able to work together to really make this database really useful for the researchers.
Mm.
So definitely been a group effort.
Yeah, well, huge credit to Judy for kicking the whole thing off and coming up with the idea in the first place. But yeah, kudos to the whole of the Scientify team now, growing.
Well, I feel like we've come to a really nice conclusion. And I just wanted to go over to Kelly just in case she has any final questions.
I had a final thought. It's not really like we'll be putting you on the spot a little bit because it's definitely not within the scope of the project, but just generally to get your impressions. Funders are definitely moving more towards an open everything with regards to the academic research environment and ecosystem. But one part of it that is still really closed off is grant applications and review. And I wonder if now with some funders pushing for a more open access publishing, preprint publishing, open peer review element as well, what do we think about the grant stage of that process and whether there's any scope for that to be opened up in the future?
Well, I think funders should be more transparent with applicants who are rejected, right? And I think, I mean, a lot of it probably comes down to time and capacity, but I think that would be so helpful for researchers if they were able to get feedback from the funders about why it was rejected. Unfortunately, oftentimes it's just, we had too many applicants. Your application was great. I mean, in a perfect world, maybe the funders could provide some support. And I think this happens kind of organically to some extent. Funders might say, you had a really great application. Look, here's another funding opportunity that might be a good fit for you. I've seen that happen. I think, I mean, would they be more, would or could funders be more transparent about how many applicants or what came up in the applications? I don't know. I think funders are working, I mean, they're thinking about this a lot, how to be fair, and being very clear about their criteria. I've seen actually last year, there was some experiments done with funders where they participated in this study to look at, would it be possible to, have a bit of a lottery system, actually, where you get 100 applicants and 50 of them are all equally qualified. Well, that may not be the case. Let's say 10 of them in the end are all equally qualified. There's nothing really to break the tie based on what their criteria, or if they have like some of them have like tiebreaker criteria, which is interesting. But if they're all equal, could they then put those 10 applications into a lottery system? That's something that some funders have tried, and I think I've asked researchers if they like this idea, and most people do. I haven't heard anyone say, they say, yes, if they're all equally qualified, I would want to be thrown into a lottery, because it's a lottery anyway. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah. I think, I mean, they're experimenting for sure with just different ways to make this process more fair. But in the end, like with that, people are still wasting time on applications that won't get funded. I don't know if they would ever be, I mean, what do you think, Kelly? Would they, could a funder really open up the reviews of these applications, and would people want that?
I don't think that research, I think on some sides, researchers would find the feedback really interesting, right? Like, what were the things that they really liked about some applications and some things that were falling short on others? Like, maybe they could provide some more generic or collated feedback at the end of a funding call to say, like, we didn't see enough of this in our applications generally, and the ones that were successful had more information about that, rather than giving the feedback on the actual applications, like publishing it. I mean, giving it to the researcher is fine, but publishing it openly, more broadly, I don't see researchers be happy with that. at all, like having everyone know how many applications they submitted that were rejected. I don't think that that's good, but I think there are ways that they could introduce more transparency in the process, which would help to benefit researchers. And actually, perhaps one of those is standardizing the process a little bit more across the different big national funders, at least, so that researchers, where applicable, can take their application from here and submit it also there, or, you know, after, in a cascading system, for example, without them having to make so many changes in between.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, that doesn't exist.
No.
It's another
That's
one
our
of those
next
great
startup.
ideas. So you just turn away.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, I know this personally because of the all of the grant applications that we've prepared is very
I was going to
siloed.
say that, actually, like how much have you learned about your own product by going through those your own applications for funding?
Yes, but I do think
but yeah,
if funders could, I mean, I think it's a time issue, but if they could take the time to even find a way to quickly give the rejected applicants feedback, that would be so helpful, because then, you know, hopefully they could take that feedback and take it on to the next application and maybe increase their chances of getting the next funding. Yeah, it's really difficult when you don't know.
yeah.
And it's probably even more, I mean, difficult and really frustrating if you have been told, oh, this was a perfect application. There's no reason to reject it. We just had too many applicants. You know, and then in cases like that, I always wonder, could there be some solution to save researchers time in the next cycle? Like, could they just hold on to those, you know, really stellar applications from the year prior and then consider funding those instead of asking, you know, for 1,000 more applications the next year? I mean, obviously that wouldn't be fair to some people in the next round, but could save everybody more time, right?
It's a very similar challenge to the challenge of publishing the research. You know, you, as a researcher, you're submitting your research to a journal, it gets peer reviewed, and then it's rejected. And then you think, okay, at least I got some review reports, but off to the next one. And you hope that it will eventually be accepted, and through peer review, it will be improved. But it's the same thing. And you know, if publishers haven't managed to find a way to resolve that challenge of kind of going from one application or submission to another, you know, it's interesting that it's a similar challenge, and it's reflected earlier on in the researcher's life cycle as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many points in the researcher life cycle where time is wasted, and I think we should all be really invested in thinking of solutions at every point, because ultimately we want them to spend the majority of their time doing research, and we know that's not the case. So if anyone in this process, whether it's the publishers or us at Scientify Research with our database, or, you know, the funders, if there's anything we can think of, creative solutions to saving the researchers valuable time, I think we should talk about it.
I think that's a wonderful note to finish on.
I think so too.
We usually ask one final question. I don't know, Kelly, do you want to ask the question, or shall I ask? You're having a coughing fit. Great time, Kelly. Amazing timing, as always.
Sorry, go for it.
Okay. Well, usually we ask, what would be your kind of top tip for anyone in the industry? But I'm going to ask a slightly different variation. You know, you're working in a startup. What would be your top tip to someone who's thinking of launching a startup in kind of research and maybe publishing, or at any point in the researcher's life cycle? You know, what would be your top tip to start working and really kick things off?
One top tip.
You can give one, that's fine.
I think the most important tip for starting a startup in the research, well, any startup really, it doesn't have to just be within research services, is to really understand the problem, to identify a problem, you know it's a problem, and then really talk to people, because what you think is the problem may not actually be, maybe you don't see the full scope of the problem. So to really talk to people. And I think this is something that any successful startup does, is user interviews, to really focus in the beginning on user interviews, and also to develop a product. I also think that it's important to develop a product, like a minimal viable product right away, something that is useful. Maybe it's not what you envisage as the most useful product, but you have to start somewhere to get to really test the market and see if people find it useful. You have to validate that. So I would say just don't be afraid to start, because you have to start somewhere. And hopefully, when you look back later, when you have this amazing product that everyone's using, I mean, I think you should look back and say, oh, at the beginning, this was embarrassing. but but look at how it evolved. I think that the best startups, they iterate, right? You don't come out with a perfect product in the beginning. You start with something that's useful, and then it just gets more useful over time.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. We really, really appreciate you coming on to our podcast / blog, Women Behind the Journals.
Thank you for having me.
I've been Robin Mugridge, and my co-host is Kelly Woods. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.